Vanakkam, friends. This is ARRM Arun. I'm president of the Southern India Chamber of Commerce and Industry, SICCI. On behalf of SICCI, we take great pleasure in welcoming our esteemed guest for today, Mr. N. Ram, Director of the Hindu Publishing Group. We also take great pleasure in welcoming each one of you to today's interesting session 26 of the SICCI-360 series. For those of you who are joining us newly, I'm sure that you might be aware that SICCI has completed 112 years of service to industry, government, and society. During these years, we have conducted tremendous number of programs where we've invited guests of eminence across all walks of life. We, however, felt that our guests who come to most of our programs spend perhaps about 20-25 minutes of their time addressing only in areas of their expertise. We, however, felt that our guests have much more to offer than just the area of expertise. And that's how we came up with the concept of SICCI-360. We wanted to give it a multidimensional perspective, and that is why we came up with the name of SICCI-360. We like this to be a lively discussion with our eminent guests. Before I continue with the rest of my slide that you see in front of you, I would like to draw your attention to the names of two of our executives listed in the bottom of this slide. Please make note of it, and if any of you have any trouble connecting during the course of today's conversation, please give our executives a call, and they'll be glad to assist you reconnect. SICCI-360 started in October of 2020. It's not 2022 as it's mentioned there. And we've been running monthly ever since. We have completed 25 sessions, and today is our 26th. In fact, I would like to share that when we had our first session during October of 2020 with Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, it was Mr. N. Ram who had assisted us put the program together and also get the speaker confirmations and other logistics. So we certainly appreciate having Mr. N. Ram with us today. SICCI-360 is a lively discussion with our eminent guests. The guests that we have in this series are experts in their respective fields, and they share with us their all-round paths to excellence. We typically look for guests with over 3 decades of expertise in their respective industry, as well as contribution to society. This is a political platform. The session format that we follow for SICCI-360 is we go through 5 respective sections with each of our guests. We first start off with our guest expertise. We then get into our guest organization and the role within the organization. Third, we talk about our guest career path. Fourth, we talk about our guest inputs for the next generation. And finally, we talk about our guest inputs for society. We would like to encourage you, the audience, to participate along with us. You can always post your comments, suggestions on the online chat box, and we'll be glad to have that addressed during the course of today's conversation. There are 2 very simple guidelines that we follow as part of the SICCI-360 series. Number 1 is we want our guests to be at comfort at all points of time so that we are able to re-invite our guests sometime in the future. And secondly, we would like you, the audience, to be able to gain out of your participation with this. With those few words, I would now like to share a few words about Mr. N. Ram. He was born in 1945. He finished his high schooling at the Madras Christian College Higher Secondary School. He has an undergraduate degree in history from Loyola College. He has a postgraduate degree in history from Presidency College. He later did his Master of Science in Comparative Journalism at the Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. He was Vice President of the Student Federation of India, and he's been in the media scene since 1966. His area of interest has been Indian politics, specifically focusing on India's foreign policy as well as nuclear policy. He was instrumental in the investigation towards the Bofors arms deal corruption scandal, and he was recognized by the Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism during its centennial celebrations. Mr. Ram has been MD of the Hindu Group from 1977 till 2003. He's been the editor of Frontline and Sports Star from 1991 to 2003. He's been the editor-in-chief of the Hindu Group from 2003 to 2012, and he's chairman of the Kasturi and Sons Limited and publisher of the Hindu 2013 till now. He's been the founding trustee of the Media Development Foundation, MDF, as well as the Asian College of Journalism based in Chennai. He is on the board of visitors of the Graduate School of Journalism of Columbia University. He's earned tremendous number of awards. He's got the Padma Bhushan for journalism in 1990. He received the Asian Investigative Journalist of the Year award from Press Foundation of India in 1990. He received the B.D. Goenka Award for Excellence in Journalism in 1989, the National Citizens Award in 1995, XLRI's first JRD Tata Award for Business Ethics in 2002, and an international award, which is the Sri Lanka Ratna, which is Sri Lanka's highest national honor conferred on non-nationals of Sri Lanka. This he received in 2005. With these few words, I now take pleasure in again welcoming Mr. N. Ram to today's program. Mr. Ram, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Arun. It's a pleasure again to be in this session. I've listened to it before, but this is my first in this series. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Glad to have you with us. So let's get started. When we look at the Hindu, Mr. Ram, it was established during the pre-independent era when the British curbed Indian media from publishing articles that had anti-British flavor. Do you feel this venture earned the wrath of the British during its time? When we look at today, even today, several start their day with the Hindu and coffee. This goes hand in hand. What are the factors that have made it possible? And the third part of this question is, why the name Hindu when we preach secularism within our country?
Yes, relevant questions. The Hindu was started on September 20, 1878, as part of that stage of the freedom struggle. There was no outright demand for independence, but the Hindu got in for as part of the freedom movement stream, which began in the 19th century. Why it was respected was, I think, very early it practiced a kind of serious journalism, and a big advantage was that Mahatma Gandhi, when he was in South Africa, actually communicated to the Hindu and would report on this. So very early on, much before he became the Mahatma, I think there was this contact. So although circulation was small at that time, and financially the newspaper was struggling, as a voice, it was respected. And I think over time, those values have by and large been preserved or retained and even strengthened. Why the name the Hindu? Yes, it's often puzzled me because, for one thing, in the 19th century, the Indians were often referred to as Hindus, even in the writings of Karl Marx. But there was also an interest in promoting the advancement of educated sections of the population. They were called educated Hindus because in the very first editorial the Hindu wrote on September 20, 1878, titled Ourselves, it addresses the question, but makes it saying that some missionaries are spreading false information about the backwardness of the Hindu population and so on. There was also racism. But then it went on to make it very clear, and I quote from that editorial, in religion, though there may have been of late occasions to look with unpleasant feelings and suspicion upon the conduct of a particular sect of missionaries, we shall observe strictest neutrality. In religion, we shall observe strictest neutrality. Sectarian disputes we shall never allow to appear in our columns. But when religious questions involve interests of a political and social character, we shall keep our columns open to any prudent remarks and legitimate criticism. In other words, when religion intrudes on politics or they get mixed up, then we are free to comment and we'll open up our columns. So this is made very clear, and I'd say over 144 years of its existence, this approach to religion, keeping a strict neutrality and not dabbling in religious disputes and so on, has held.
Thank you for
the answer. The answer to your question is still not complete. We have to do some research on why it was called the Hindu at that time.
Looking forward to it once you have that information so that we can share it with our audience. Moving on to a more serious topic. Since February of this year, all of us are familiar with the Ukraine-Russia war and it's certainly had a major impact on the geopolitical scenario. And it's still continuing forward. Everybody thought that it would be over within a week's time, but it's now months on together and it's still continuing. Do you see it ending anytime? And also, because of that, is the global economy going to be getting worse in the time to come? What do you think our lessons are from this?
I think there are some indications that this war, this conflict brought on by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, will end sometime in spring. This is what the media have been saying in Europe, and let's see if it comes true, because it can't go on and on for all this. However, I would say that there's another side. While we deplore, while I oppose the invasion, there were many reasons that provoked President Putin and Russia to do it, above all the relentless expansion of NATO. So I think for the war for some kind of solution to emerge, both sides have to give and take on this, and eventually it has to be a negotiated settlement. So I hope the war will end in the first quarter or so, or first half of 2023. But the economic impact will be is very major. Russia has been able to manage its economy. It's of course a big setback, but it's because of its enormous oil resources and natural gas, and the sanctions, which have been often counterproductive. I think Russia has been not brought to its knees at all. On the contrary, although there are many hardships, how it will affect the global economy is a very complex question. It is clearly, it hits Europe very badly, the United States also. People are talking about a recession or a possible recession and so on. And therefore, but I'm not an economist, and I watch it just like all of you.
India has certainly been playing a major role in trying to be able to get the parties to talk, and also playing a role with the US. The importance of India has assumed more so in the last couple of years, perhaps. Now, even more than that, we've assumed leadership of the G20 mantle. The US government, in fact, quoted this week that Prime Minister Modi was instrumental in bringing about consensus among all participants. What do you think the world will receive from us as part of our leadership of G20? And what can India as a country hope to achieve from it?
I think India has taken a correct stand on the Ukraine war. It doesn't approve of the invasion, but it doesn't condemn Russia either, for various complex reasons. If there's time, we can go into that if there's interest. But I think we've taken a correct stand. Whichever government had been in power would have taken, I think, much the same stand. So whether I doubt we played a very major role in this, or have a very major role to play. We have to work with other countries in a similar situation to try to bring about some conciliation here. As for G20, I think India's chairmanship, it was due to come last year, but I think it was at the request of India, it will come next year. I think every country becomes chair of G20, every one of the G20, but this is an interesting time because of the political crisis and the economic stresses and so on. So India has a part to play, but I think in the Indian media, we often read exaggerated accounts of what India can do. If you raise expectations so high and you're unable, and the situation is not resolved, I think you're going to, there's a trap there that it'll seen as India's failure. I don't think we have that kind of role. It's part of a collective effort among certain countries which are not aligned to one or the other. So I think that's how I see it. But it's here, the old non-alignment, I think, has come into play. And that has stood us in good stead. It goes back a long way.
My next two questions are going to be on the economy and inclusion. Yes, you did say that you're not an expert on the economy, but I certainly feel that you're an expert in any field that you get involved with, and economy has definitely been one that you're looking at for a good period of time. So here we go. SICCI has submitted an agenda for the current government, and this we did last year, areas that we should be focusing on, how to be able to boost the economy post-COVID, and so on. And we had also invited you for that conference. You had addressed us, and you had suggested that the focus has to be on MSMEs, trying to be able to get them to increase their scope of activity. And also, importantly, government institutions like TIIC and TITCO needs to be streamlined so that they can support MSMEs better. While we see MSMEs coming back to normalcy to some extent, how can we really propel them so that they are able to fulfill their potential?
Yeah, Mr. Arun, I would commend SICCI and personally your leadership for focusing on this issue of MSMEs and what the government can do to have a more conducive and positive environment for this. I think this needs to happen. This needs to be pushed, and I think you have to take it up with the Tamil Nadu government and particularly the Chief Minister. I think they will do their best, but there are so many tasks that I think there is a sequential ordering of what can be done. There are constraints and so on, but I think this is very, very important. And I think SICCI must be commended for keeping it on center stage. If I think we need to campaign for this, we need to lobby, and I think it'll be very good if you once again SICCI takes the initiative. I'll certainly help in this respect. Normalcy is not good enough. It needs to be growth. And therefore, I fully agree with you. But it has to be a focused engagement with the government now that the government is on top of many other problems that it inherited during the pandemic, and also because of the poor financial situation that Tamil Nadu found itself in earlier. I think under the leadership of Mr. Stalin, Muka Stalin, the finance minister, I think is able to do quite a lot. Dr. Pannivel Tyagarajan, I think those efforts must be strengthened. Once the government, once the financial situation of the state is comfortable, is ahead of most other states in the country, then I think this will happen. But it won't happen on its own. People have to. I don't like the word lobby, but certainly you have to champion that cause.
Thank you for your appreciation, Mr. Ram. In fact, for your reference as well as the reference of each of our guests, SICCI played a major role last month where we took a delegation of 33 businessmen from Tamil Nadu to the Czech Republic. I'm sure you're aware that I also represent the Czech Republic in Tamil Nadu and Puducherry. And this delegation was led by the MSME Minister, Thiru Anbarasan. And we also had the IAS team led by Mr. Arun Roy join this event. And the primary purpose of this was to be able to increase traction among the MSME community as well as industry at large between the Czech Republic and Tamil Nadu. It was a wonderful session and we will continue to champion this exercise. Going to the last question in the first section, Mr. Ram, you also addressed SICCI's 101st AGM and you spoke about inclusion, perhaps moving away from the economy. You spoke about financial inclusion, gender inclusion, technology, healthcare, among others. Why is it so difficult to engender inclusion in spite of several government schemes and policies? How do you think we can catalyze this process of mainstreaming the marginalized sections of society?
Historically, Mr. Arun, Tamil Nadu has had an advantage in this respect because there's a book on this subject called the Dravidian Model. Even if some of it is exaggerated, I think it holds. The basic idea being that you can combine growth with the pursuit of social justice, and inclusion is very much part of that. Inclusion, in fact, is at the center of it when we speak about social justice. So there is a lot of data to show that historically, in the modern period, or in the post from the 70s onwards, Tamil Nadu has been able to pursue this quite effectively compared with many other states. But given the trends in the economy, inequalities are growing. There is no question about it. You can see, the celebration of billionaires, the world's second richest man, and India's first and second richest, and all this. These narratives, I think, work directly against the pursuit of inclusion. We seem to be it's all right to celebrate success, but to celebrate this kind of inequality, if you like, without quite realizing it is not a good thing. So there are no easy answers to it, but in the areas of healthcare, access to technology, access to the internet, for example, access to digital services, and so on, and to some extent financial services. I think a great deal can be done. But and as for gender, I think Tamil Nadu is in quite a good place. I think the women of Tamil Nadu are very assertive. There are still problems to be resolved. There are still issues like when somebody marries out of caste, uh, uh, severe brutal punishment is sometimes visited on the young couple, and so on. These are the caste remains a real problem, but on the whole, Tamil Nadu, I think, is less, socially speaking, less iniquitous than other states. But we can't be complacent about it. And in fact, again, I recall that you as president of SICCI, focused very strongly on it very early on. So I think you've been able to monitor it to some extent. We have a long way to go, but looking at the overall trends, I would be dishonest if I didn't say that I despair about our growing inequalities, because those 10 trends set the agenda in the Indian economy and Indian polity.
We move on to the second section, which is your organization, which is the Hindu and your role within the organization. The Hindu has been ruling print media since 1905, but it was only 100 years later, 100 plus years later, in 2013, that the Hindu ventured into Tamil. Why was this delay to reach Tamil readers, and what impact do you think it had on the market? Importantly, do you think Hindu Tamil has reached out to the global Tamil diaspora?
Very interesting question. I've often been thinking about it. But what I remember is from the 60s onward, at least my personal experience goes, starts only from there, mid 60s. I think people believed that we couldn't handle Tamil. We are not good. They were overawed by fine writings outside there, and the editors who were from the family, although they could read Tamil and were reasonably well versed in Tamil, they were not writers, and I don't think they had the confidence to edit a Tamil newspaper. There's a major exception to this. The key founder of the Hindu, Subramania Iyer, was a scholar in Tamil. Well, not initially. He learned to write Tamil very well, and he started Swadesamitran, but it was outside this organization. So it was very late when the Tamil Hindu was started, and there's no other explanation except diffidence, perhaps a wrong assessment made over time historically, and that has had an impact on the market. We were very late entrants. There were major publications, dominated by Dinatandi, then Dinamalar. But the Tamil Hindu, when it started, we believed it had a space, not as the market leader, no, not at all. But it didn't publish too much news. It was more views and opinion, but giving news context. So there was a constraint, but it also was accepted. But growth has been steady, but not rapid. Have we reached the global Tamil diaspora to an extent? Serious members of the Tamil, those who follow Indian news seriously, I think refer to the Tamil Hindu, but I don't think we've made any great breakthrough. It's been a worthwhile venture, but with these constraints, I think growth has been steady rather than impressive.
When we look at some of the leading newspapers around the world, they have invited their readers to make voluntary financial contributions so as to support quality journalism. But however, the Hindu chose to go a different way and not go by voluntary contributions. Which model do you think is better?
I think the subscription-based model is clearly better. Initially, it was all free because we believed that in India, people wouldn't pay for news and to read a legacy newspaper online. But in recent times, I think the Hindu, in fact, was the first major Indian newspaper to put its content behind a paywall. Not a solid paywall to start with. You could read a few articles, but the paywall has worked because this is the revenue model that has worked There's no real business model has yet been found that will match the business model that worked very well in the second part of the 20th century, namely the advertising-led business model, where daily newspapers, were hugely subsidized by advertising. In fact, you would lose, if your circulation increased, there was a loss to be incurred unless you could more than make it up through advertising revenues. For the Hindu, for example, during that period, let us say 1980s or 1970s, 80s, 75-80% of ad revenues, total revenues came from advertising. Today, it's more, it's still, advertising still dominates because India is still in that position, but circulation, you aspire to take it to 50-50 for a printed newspaper. And as for the digital products, the digital publications, because when I say digital, you have apps, you have many forms in which digital journalism can be presented. I think it has to be based on subscription, because you can't depend on advertising. The giants, Google, Facebook, even Twitter and so on, they command the numbers and you can't really compete with them. And therefore it has to be something that is valued by readers so that you would pay for it. And that, I think, is the way to go.
Continuing with that, the Hindu is probably the only newspaper today with a reader's editor. What were the reasons for this initiative, and do you feel it's been effective? And also continuing with advertising that you had spoken about earlier, when we look at the Hindu supplements today, they are of extremely good quality and they really connect with their readers. But advertisers usually prefer advertising only in the main newspaper. How are you able to maintain good supplementary editions in spite of this?
Yeah, on your last question, absolutely right. Advertisers tend to prefer the main newspaper, but you've got to woo them to support the supplements of quality. And thank you for that question, because I think it's an important question. Today, given the rising newsprint prices and so on, pagination, that is control over your pages, has become very important. And one of the tasks of our CEO, he oversees the balance between what is allotted to news and what is for advertising, and also the page levels. Sometimes you have to cut down the page level. And this is, I think, a tricky thing. It's a daily balance you have to find. If you have too many ads and too little news, I think you lose quality. But if you have a lot of news and very little advertising, or you don't give enough, sufficient number of pages, because people they don't come to you just for news. They see it on television or online. They come to you for some in-depth analysis, commentary, putting things, making sense, if you like. And that's the role that takes a lot of space. On the digital space, on digital platforms, that's not an issue. Space is no constraint at all, but in print it is. So, and as for the reader's editor, yes, we were inspired by the example of the Guardian newspaper in the UK. We invited the then editor, Alan Rusbridger, and the then reader's editor of the Guardian, Ian Mays, to India. They gave lectures, and we decided to adopt their model completely. The last reader's editor was A.S. Paneerselvam, who did an exceptional job. The first one was our former news editor, K. Narayanan, who was also very good. And then there was Viswanathan. Right now, there's a hiatus, and we are yet in the process of identifying a suitable reader's editor. At the moment, we do not have a reader's editor. That's the truth. But this should be made up. We do need a reader's editor, and the job is to act as an ombudsman, a full-time news ombudsman, independent of the editor. And I think this is a very good check in the age of disinformation and misinformation. It's a very, very good check on the editorial practices and newsroom practices of a newspaper, because the key thing here is the ombudsman is responsible only to the board. If you have a trust, the board of trustees, and in our case, the board of directors, directly appointed with absolute independence for a fixed term. And the ombudsman, he or she can command access to every part of your newsroom and your news operations. Nothing is secret from the ombudsman. He can ask for explanations from journalists, and the task of the editor is to support it. But the ombudsman is not necessarily an adversary. It's not an adversarial role. The ombudsman has to be accepted, has to have good relations with all the journalists, including the editor. And that's a job, I think, that it's worked very well in the Hindu, I think, and it has prevented the publication of mistakes. This also has a preventive benefit, if you like, because when they know this person is there, and corrections will come from all kinds of sources, internally, or the ombudsman's own reading of the newspaper, or from readers outside. And so the ombudsman then processes this, or the ombudsman's office, and this. And the ombudsman also writes a column on quality and what has happened. It's a step towards transparency. It takes you right into the newsroom in a rather candid way. I can go on about it, but I know that we have a time constraint. I really believe in this institution, and no other Indian newspaper, major daily newspaper, has instituted this practice, and we hope that in the near future we'll identify a suitable person to be the reader's editor of the Hindu.
I have a related question to that, but I'll come to that after this current one. Our next question is going to be from Mrs. Sangeeta Bala, who's the chair of our Women in Industry Committee. Mrs. Sangeeta Bala, if you're online, please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Arun. Very good morning, sir. Very pleasure to hear from you.
Good morning.
Yeah. So today, in this world of digitalization, we see a lot of youngsters, pursuing journalism. Journalism has become a sought after career for many, which is a very nice thing. And we see a lot of YouTubers cropping up day in, day out, and it's a huge competition in the digital world. With all this, we see Hindu as its magnificent presence across all channels and platform. So how do we manage that? So be it is the print media, electronic or digital, we have our very strong presence. How do we manage that? And also, what is strategy and approach towards it, be in terms of content, writing, editing, or the story selection? Is there any drastical different between the digital platforms when compared to print?
Very good question. And I think, yes, there are significant differences, but our strength is in our major newsrooms, and it comes from print. That's the basis, because it's a legacy media organization, and so on. But we have been learning on the job. That's all I can say. Initially, the website, the e-paper, that is the as printed digital edition of the Hindu, it's called the e-paper. These were, these largely reflected what was in print. There was very little additional material in it. But over time, and looking at other models abroad, but say the New York Times or the Financial Times or the Guardian, which makes all its digital content free, then we realized that there's a long way to go here. And along with the rest of the Indian media, news media or newspaper industry, we began to invest seriously in digital journalism. And fortunately, we had a cushion, because print did not collapse in the way that print declined, but it did not collapse in the way that it did in Western countries or in more developed economies for various complex reasons. And that gave us a sort of backup or a cushion so that you could, by trial and error, find your way forward into the digital age. And now we have a group digital editor. We have a digital editor for the Hindu, and the other Frontline and the Business Line. They're all very active in the digital space, and I believe we command a very dedicated readership in India and abroad, thanks to these the work that has been done in the digital space. And we have to be on every platform. I think the numbers have to increase. Twitter following, Facebook, and so on. It's got to increase multiple times if you're going to really make an impact. You have to be more active. What journalists are encouraged to do on these, say on Twitter, is still a matter of discussion, because you can't mix up the personal with the professional. If you want to tweet from your personal account, personal things, then I don't think you'll be mixed up with your professional job. Every journalist is encouraged to go on social media platforms, but out there is disinformation and misinformation on a scale that is unbelievable. When I started journalism, there's nothing like this. We knew there was fake news, false news, and so on, or sensational journalism, yellow journalism, and so on. But the present threat is of a totally different order. And you can only hope that through serious, verified, if you like, professional journalism, you can outcompete the various fellows who are posting in the name of news. I think India faces a very major threat from disinformation. By disinformation, I mean deliberate, conscious putting out of false information, often of a toxic nature, whether it's during the pandemic or on communal relations or on politics. I think there are many actors, bad actors, doing this. I don't want to name names here, but you see the problems. And recently, The Wire got into trouble, and I think the criminal case filed against it is totally unjust and over the top. But they got into trouble precisely because you can fabricate information, and they were victims of somebody who I think internally fabricated digital information. Newspapers have to be aware of this. I think the Hindu is in a much stronger position when it comes to facing disinformation. I don't think we have made any serious mistake of the kind that even the New York Times has made. For example, during the Iraq War, the New York Times, Judith Miller of the New York Times, published a number of articles claiming there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which is totally false. And a lot of it went out in the digital space. But today we know that that was a trap. They were taken for a ride, and their contribution to building up public opinion supporting the invasion of Iraq by the United States was a tragic story. It's now being recognized in the US. There's a literature on the subject, but fortunately in India, I think we have not got into any of those fiascos.
Continuing with fake news or maybe even paid news, Mr. Ram, glad to know that Hindu has taken a lead and made sure that they are addressing it in every way possible. But certainly the public at large read more than one newspaper these days, whether online or printed. How is the public to differentiate from such kind of fake reporting or paid news? And in continuation to that question, one of the major headlines that we read today in the newspapers is that of the Adani Group's open offer for NDTV. What are your thoughts on this subject?
On the second issue, I think it won't be a good thing for NDTV or for news television in India. Of course, they got into a vulnerable position, and it was earlier with another big, I can be open about it. I think Mr. Mukesh Ambani helped them very much for many years. He had certain rights, but never exercised them. He never interfered in editorial operations. But the situation changed, and I think since that liability remained, I think for a huge discount, the Adani Group has been able to acquire those shares. And I don't think it's a good thing for the Indian media, because NDTV is a channel I respect. That's the only news channel I regularly follow for Indian news. I think Pranoy Roy, I must disclose that Pranoy Roy and Radhika Roy are very good friends, very close friends. I engage with them very often on many issues. We even went to the World Cup in Brazil in 2014, and I really know their honesty and their integrity and their major role in the news television space. And if this sort of hostile takeover, once it is complete, I don't think it can be stopped now. I think it will not be good, but it remains to be seen. I want to give it a chance. There are many good journalists in NDTV. Whether they'll be allowed to function independently later on or expected to turn into propagandists remains to be seen. So I would give it a chance. NDTV is a valuable channel.
And how do you think the public can differentiate the paid news and fake news?
I think it's by establishing reputation, what business people will call brand. You got to strengthen your reputation or brand, and that's and also make it more transparent. Tell people, readers. Earlier, it used to be a secret what went on in the newsroom unless somebody published a book. But now you got to be very open and transparent and tell them about the verification procedures you have. The second thing, Mr. Arun, I want to mention that I'm a representative from India in an initiative that the BBC launched a few years ago. It's called the Trusted News Initiative, and we use they use technology to detect fake news or fake posts and so on. What are called AI can be used to detect deep fakes. But the other part of the initiative is to get the big social media giants, the big players, to finance educational courses on media literacy, or what can be called media education. Go among students and inform, give them an opportunity to learn about the media and what they can do. It's often called media literacy for the general population, but it will be very effective if it can be done in schools and colleges. And I think many of these institutions will welcome courses. So courses are being designed by the BBC and others. And I'm involved with the Asian College of Journalism. I'm one of the trustees. And I think we can do a great deal. This is in Chennai, and we can do a great deal in this area. And I think even Facebook and others are willing to support, or Meta today is willing to support such ventures. This is the way you can guard yourself, strengthen your reputation, and clearly differentiate between what is authentic and what is fake.
We now move on to the third section of today's conversation, which is on your career path. Mr. Ram, you spent time at Columbia University in its graduate school of journalism, as I mentioned earlier. How did it assist you in your journalism career?
Very much. I think it was at the right time. I had just begun as a reporter, also with some training in editing news copy in the Hindu. And soon after that, after I finished my MA at the Presidency College in 1967, I went to the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia University. I was one of the early students to go there. There have been one or two before me there, but I was one of the early students, and it opened my eyes because for the first time, I heard about something called investigative journalism. Of course, we did investigations in India, but to learn about methods of investigation as though it were a separate, specialized field, that was good. For the first time, I came across video. That is not my area, but it opened my eyes. But more than anything else, there was a political impact. Huge protests against the Vietnam War, the US war of invasion and an occupation in Vietnam, and the rest of Indochina, the movement of Black Power. The campus was on fire when I was there, and there was a lot of idealism there. Also, some views that were over the top, but this radicalized a large number of students, and I was one of them. I returned to India. I'd learned quite a bit about journalism in this 1 year. It's a master's degree packed in 1 year. And I also was radicalized socially and politically, I'd say. So that is the impact of my being in the class of 1968 at the Columbia Journalism School.
Our next question is from the audience. This is Miss Shakti Maheshwari. She's doing her third year Electronics and Communication Engineering at SVCE Chennai. Shakti, if you're online, please go ahead. Shakti, are you online?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity, sir. Sir, I
Yes,
have a
please
question
go ahead.
for you. As a youth, you started a journal called Radical Review. What was its objective? How did Marxism inspire you, and how did your family view it, sir? Did any mentor's writing or book inspire you?
The Radical Review, we started the Radical Review after I returned from the United States. Not just me, but my schoolmate and classmate of many years, my friend Mr. P. Chidambaram and Maithili Shivaraman. We were among the key people who started this, and then then Mr. Chidambaram get into Congress politics and was not part of it. But the idea was to have progressive content. The idea was to do reporting of workers' struggles, problems of agricultural laborers in East Kiഴக்கு Tanjai, East Tanjavur, and some very good reports were published in those days. I also did some research on the condition of fishermen in then Madras. And Maithili Shivaraman, who passed away a few years ago, a little senior to Mr. Chidambaram and me, she did a number of excellent reports and writings on this question. So, so it was, in a sense, an alternative to the established media. That was the attempt. And for obvious reasons, it couldn't last very long because we got involved in other things, and this required time and energy, concentration. And then we didn't have enough people to have it. So a few issues came out, which I think were much appreciated, at least among progressive people, including on social issues, caste, and so on. And I think some of it has been published in collections. You can read them yourselves. How did the family react? I think my family was quite liberal because they're not very pleased that I came under the influence of Marxism and was part of the left movement in India. But there was no real conflict, I think. But for a while, I was outside the Hindu because there was a strike at that point, and I wasn't happy with the way the management or the family conducted the negotiations, but the issue was resolved. But for a considerable period, I was outside. I was not part of the newspaper, but I kept writing in other forums. But my family, I think, was quite modern. They were not harsh about this. We'd have differences. My father, for example, my mother was very supportive. My brothers were supportive. My sister. My uncle, Mr. G. Kasturi, was very supportive. I even did a coverage of a very interesting cricket series, India versus West Indies in 1974-75, which introduced a great batsman, one of the world's great cricketers, Viv Richards. And there was Andy Roberts, there was Gordon Greenidge, Captain Clyde Loy. I covered that whole series for the Hindu while remaining outside. So I think today families are often more supportive, but I must really be grateful for the space that I was provided at that time. So looking at it today, I marvel about people in those days accepting what I did. And I'm very proud of what I did also at that point.
Mr. Ram, you've been wicketkeeper batsman for the Tamil Nadu state cricket team in Ranji Trophy. Was this, and you were certainly very passionate about cricket during your younger days, was this the passion, the reason why the Hindu started Sports Star in 1978? And do you feel that cricket has certainly eclipsed all other sports in our country to the extent to which people don't concentrate on other sports?
I love cricket, particularly Test cricket, and these days I watch a lot of football. And we are even going to the Qatar World Cup very soon, next month. But because I love watching football in the stadium, but that's not my game. My cricket was really. I played one Ranji Trophy match, and I was in the squad for a whole year, and then I left for the US. There were better players than me. PK Belliyappa, wicketkeeper, was very good. So I was a wicketkeeper and batsman. But I think my level was really university, inter-university. I even captained Madras University, and we once reached the final, the Rohinton Baria tournament. I played first division league cricket. People like Salim Durrani, Venkatraghavan, my contemporaries. I mean, Salim was older, but we played together. So I was really a marginal first-class cricketer, good enough for the university, but not much beyond. Secondly, no, Sports Star was not because of me. The Sport and Pastime had been, there was a forerunner to the Sports Star, that was Sport and Pastime, which was the first magazine of its kind in India. That was started by much earlier. And I think people, the older generation was inspired. They were very much into sports. My paternal grandfather was very into, who was a very orthodox man later on in his life, Orthodox Hindu. He was keen on hockey. He himself played hockey, and there were many other members of our family who played. My father played golf, billiards. Kasturi played. My uncle Kasturi played tennis. My uncle, Mr. Rangarajan, played tennis. Another uncle, Mr. Parthasarathi, was very much into sport. He died at a very young age. So it was a very sports-minded family, and I can't claim credit for starting a sports magazine at all. I was, of course, keen on it once it was started. Do I think cricket killed other sports? No. I think it's excellent that cricket took off. There's no reason why football is a real mass game, the global game, the beautiful game. And it's shameful that India has not progressed beyond where it is today. There's a lot of interest. You'll see I was in Kerala recently, and there's a tremendous following in parts of Kerala, thousands of people, fighting about, in a friendly way, Brazil or Argentina and so on. And Kerala, and they went into a collective depression when Saudi Arabia defeated Argentina. So what prevents us from doing better? And in field and track, some progress. Just compare yourself with China, the similar population. Where are they in sports? And where are we? Of course, they are also backward in football. Cricket has hardly reached China. But in our field and track and many other areas, they are a major sports power, and we have to get there. And I'm pleased that in Tamil Nadu, the chess Olympiad was held very successfully, and the chief minister promised to privilege sports, to promote sports in a very serious way, and I hope it'll happen, starting at Tamil Nadu. The state that has led in sports promotion, I don't know if people have followed it, is Odisha. Year after year, we give awards, and Odisha is clearly the state that wins each time, promotion of hockey, infrastructure, and so on. I don't think cricket can be made a scapegoat for India's failure to progress in football and many areas of track and field.
We now move on to the fourth section of today's conversation, which is your inputs for the next generation. We see a lot of women today in journalism. How do you think this has shaped news reporting? And do you think that this will be a contributing factor in gender sensitization?
Yes, absolutely. This is a very important question. And I think over the last 25 to 30 years, there's been a feminization of the newsroom. In fact, in many places, they are in the majority. I mentioned the Asian College of Journalism. We are about 25 years old, and or a little less, 22 years old. And year after year, women predominate among those who enter. It's an open competitive process. And I would say about 60 or 65% in many years, young women constitute that. It has certainly sensitized journalists, sensitized people who read newspapers or watch television or listen to radio. They come in large numbers and with a lot of idealism, I think. Some of them do not stay, but today the trend has been reversed, that if you got married, you're not able to continue with this because you may go somewhere else or you have other responsibilities. Today, women are insisting that I will continue to work in a large number of cases. So among the people who come out of our Asian College of Journalism. That's my direct experience. A very large number are active in the Indian news media today, whether it's television or newspapers. We have many hundreds of people out there. In fact, probably a few, more than that. In India and abroad also, some of them in very influential or important positions. And women, I think, are doing exceptionally well here. There may be still some shortcomings. Whether they are adequately represented in the top jobs and so on, this needs to be looked at. But I think the progress has been just brilliant over the last 25 years, and the benefit is very great.
You certainly have been a veteran journalist, Mr. Ram, over the decades. You've seen how news and reporting has progressed from decade to decade. What do you think the future of journalism will be when we compare it with what it is today? What advice do you have for emerging young journalists? And also, what are the qualities that make up a good journalist?
I think there are many cynical statements about this. I think one, there was a British wit who said, "A plausible manner, a modicum of literary ability, rat-like cunning." So these are phrases often used to describe journalists. But seriously, I think the young journalist has to be educated. I think you have to be good in certain areas. A general education, either in science or the humanities, is a good starting point for developing journalism. Then you have to have some kind of idealism that I can contribute as a journalist to changing society, changing the world. It's not merely a job. Of course, you go there mainly as a job, but it's not merely a job. I will have integrity. I will be independent, and so on. But journalism is essentially an attempt to establish the factual truth. We can discuss what is truth, the deeper truth, and so on. But at a factual level, the first thing young people should learn is, journalism is first and foremost a discipline of verification. You verify everything. That's your role. What are the other tasks? Sense making. Verification is one. I have many tools of verification now, but in the digital age, it's quite tricky. You can be tricked into publishing things. Fabrication is possible, looking very plausible. And that's what happened with The Wire, and many others have been stung. But verification, for example, on Twitter, don't take all photographs which are on Twitter. The Hindus, one of its rules in its system is, don't just take from Twitter, verify. It has to be a verified handle, Twitter handle, or you must know the person, or you must be in touch with that person before, with permission, you can use photographs over which you have no rights, and so on. And if somebody sends you a scoop, verify the credentials of the person. If there's a photograph, either it should come from your photographer, or your photographer should be able to vouch for the authenticity of the picture, because pictures can be photoshopped and completely made up. And then you'll be in big trouble. That's first. Second is sense making, provide context. So read. Young people should read. I find that many of them do not read newspapers or watch news on whatever platform. You don't have to read print all the time. You can read it on digital platforms. But keep yourself informed in the way journalists were required to do in the old days. It's a problem still. So when I go to the Asian College of Journalism, the first thing I ask them, do you read newspapers? And so, of course we do. Some of them will say, but I'm not sure that all of them do, even those who study journalism. Then investigation. Learn how to, journalism is also a discipline that investigates, that goes beneath the surface, that tries to cover up, that tries to discover inequities in society. So that with the idea of making things better, not to bring down things. And so I think that's important. Then you have this function of bearing witness. Don't sit at home, go out there. We had a big problem during the pandemic when there was not enough grassroots reporting for obvious reasons. There was a lockdown. But then, in my own case, I was able to go out. And Mr. Arun, a very distinguished former president of SICCI, Dr. A.C. Muthaya, enabled me personally to go out and walk every day during this period. And there were journalists who went out of their way to do that. Mr. Muthaya said, "Come and walk in our on our grounds in Adyar House and Adyar Villa," and others found solutions. But there was a tragic period when people were dying of COVID during the second wave and even the first wave. Many reporters across India went to the crematoria, and actually verified for themselves, because there was a mismatch between the official numbers and what the data available in crematoria, and they were infected, and many of them died in this. That is the spirit of journalism. I'm not saying be reckless or take that kind of risk, but that is what idealism is all about. And so they have to be also more vigilant about being against disinformation and misinformation, which hits you in a way that it didn't happen in our days in active journalism.
The SICCI-360 team has just reminded me that we've crossed an hour and that we should wrap up soon. So I'm going to be skipping a few questions. Our next question is going to be from Ms. Sudha Mayappan, who's a member of our Economic Affairs Committee. Ms. Sudha Mayappan, if you're online, please go ahead. Ms. Sudha, please unmute yourself. You're still unmuted. Bhavani, does she need to be unmuted from your end?
I gave the request, sir. She has to unmute and speak.
Ms. Sudha, can you please unmute yourself? Okay.
I'm sorry, some of the answers were a bit long, but the questions were interesting, and I thought they needed some.
I finally unmuted myself.
Yes, please go ahead.
It's always such a pleasure to hear you talk.
Thank you.
And this was a very nice session because we got to hear some personal stories about the family and the history. I really enjoyed it, and not only about journalism. So my question to you, 1 second. If you could tell us, because there's such an onslaught, I should say, of social media and information and journalism from social media. The way news is reported or consumed there is very different from how one does it through traditional media. So what would you say for these young people who are trained in profession for how to post or how to keep the journalistic ethics intact when they're posting on social media?
Journalistic ethics on the social media. Is that the question?
Because everybody's a journalist, everybody's a photographer these days, with an access to digital technology.
Yes, I think that was the old belief, citizen journalism and all that. I'm sorry to say that that has not come true, because the social media, the space is overwhelmed by false news or simply careless work. I don't want to overgeneralize, because there's some very valuable material there. For example, on science, if you see Twitter, some of the threads that the scientists put out, or even news establishments put out, they open this space. I think there's some very good content there. But looking at it, it's very hard to distinguish between or pick and choose what is valuable or not. You're so overwhelmed by it. So today, my answer to the question, can you train people to be professional, have the professional skills on social media? I very much doubt it, because it's free for all and quite chaotic. And Mr. Elon Musk, who's now acquired Twitter, is going to face the heat in this respect, because he said he's a free speech absolutist. He's already allowed Mr. Trump back. Trump has not picked it up yet. But if that kind of thing goes on, people who are serious about professional ethics, verification, authenticity, and so on, have no chance on the social media. So I think the view within our industry, within the profession, about social media is very pessimistic right now. Although we should not be, because there is that content, but the bulk of it is noise. Some of it is toxic. So we can only hope that through media literacy, these programs in schools and colleges, a sufficient number of people will pick it up, will seize the opportunity and become not full-time journalists, but with some of the professional skills that are required, that the discipline of verification. It's not just for journalism. Scientists have to do it. Social scientists have to do it. All of us have to do it. Business people have to do it. So I think, but in social media, something else happens, and you lose your head, if you like, when you go out there in many cases.
Mr. Ram, two more questions before we wrap up. The first one is, you have met Mr. Julian Assange, who was instrumental in the WikiLeaks expose. Can you share with us your interactions with him? And how do you judge the impact of the WikiLeaks expose?
I think it was very major. I met Julian Assange in the UK twice or thrice. The last time in the embassy where he was holed up, and later on surrendered to the authorities. It's a tragic story. He's a brilliant man, maybe a flawed man, but brilliant. He was an ethical hacker, one of the world's leading hackers. WikiLeaks was a great service. It offered a new model for journalism, but it has been savagely attacked for understandable reasons by governments, Western governments. And I think the cases have been completely concocted. He was trapped and is now waiting extradition to the United States. WikiLeaks have made a huge difference in those days, because it in terms of scale, the kind of material that it gave, it was completely free. There was no commercial transaction involved between WikiLeaks and, say, the Hindu, which partnered WikiLeaks on the Indian embassy cables and also the Pakistan embassy cables, and so on. A very brilliant man who was generous, but he had some personal issues which were exploited, and it's ended in I think what looks like a tragedy. I still hope that he can be freed. He's an Australian national, and if he goes to Australia, he will be quite safe there. His health is a serious concern. So I both professionally and personally, I'm very sympathetic to him, but I'm very sad about what has happened to him. WikiLeaks is not has been weakened. When they go on, we hope that whatever happens to Julian, the others will be able to continue this work. But it will be very difficult without the charismatic presence of Julian Assange leading it from the front.
And the last question for today, Mr. Ram, is from another student, Mr. Rohit Ram, who's doing his first year M&A at SVC Chennai. Rohit, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me here. You were perceived for your leftist philosophy and also your forthright comments, which for sure would have drawn criticism from different parts. How do you handle these criticisms?
Well, the criticisms by being open about it. There's nothing to be defensive about. Nobody, this business of value neutrality is just a myth. Everybody has ideas, has affiliations. And in fact, a long time ago, Walter Lippmann, one of the great thinkers on journalism, said, objectivity doesn't mean you have no views. Objectivity, in his view, was a method, a scientific method, where you tested your views against challenges. It has to be falsifiable, one of the tests of science. And so it's a method rather than people saying that I'm strictly neutral. So no newspaper, no journalist is completely neutral. You can distance yourself in certain matters. That's a prudent thing to do. So how do I handle criticisms? I'm not faced by criticisms. If somebody is on Twitter, if somebody is abusive or it's just noise, I just block them. I don't want to waste my time reading what they put out, whether it's about myself or about somebody else. If you're abusive, if you put out nonsensical things, if you are just noise, I block you. It doesn't matter. And then I'm not obliged to even waste my time looking at what they post. So criticisms are easy to handle if you are convinced that what you've done is defensible or right, and respect other people's opinions. You, as a journalist, you have to deal with various others who are completely contrary views, but it has to be in a spirit of civility. I've had interactions with Mr. Advani. I'm totally opposed to the BJP's philosophy and political ideology, but it doesn't mean that we can't find common ground on particular issues. And I've had very good interactions with Mr. Advani, with Prime Minister Modi, although he joked in a media meeting that sometimes they treat me like Ravan. Mr. Ram, his newspaper, but he's my very good friend, he said. So you can maintain a certain distance while keeping your views. So I have no problem with the criticisms, unless they get abusive or nonsensical. And then I block them. I don't go and file cases against them.
Mr. Ram, thank you very, very much for that open interaction. It's been good hearing your views on a variety of subjects. Of course, this is the first time that SICCI-360 is having a journalist to our program, and we're very glad that we could invite you over. Of course, each of us have our own views. We also represent our organization, and it's glad to hear your side of things and share it with the audience. Greatly appreciate your time, Mr. Ram.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arun, for this opportunity. I really enjoyed it, and I thank everybody who attended.
That brings us to the end of the first part of our program. There is a second part to it, which is a much briefer part, which is what we call the rapid fire round. And I would like to give you 5 words, Mr. Ram, and I would like to hear from you your immediate thought on each of these words. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It can just be one word as well as a response is fine. It's just to be able to spice up this conversation. So can we go ahead with your permission?
Yes, please.
So the first one is the Hindu.
Respected.
The second one is cricket.
Great game.
The third is God.
Doesn't exist.
That's a controversial one. but good to know. The fourth one is life.
Is what?
Life.
Life.
Yes.
Good. Must be good.
And the last one is freedom.
Must be protected at all costs.
Very good. Wonderful. Thank you again, Mr. Ram. It was great having you with us. And as a continuation of the SICCI-360 format, we would like to send a photograph of yours to you so that you can kindly autograph it and affix today's date on it so that we can make this part of our memorabilia. We will send this to you at the earliest opportunity. And also, Mr. Ram, in appreciation of your being with us today, we would like to give you a certificate that we received from Kanchi Kamakoti Child's Trust Hospital. I'm sure you're aware, for the benefit of our viewers, this is a hospital that is based in Nungabakkam in Chennai and doing UMAN's service to children from underprivileged families. They are able to treat such children at very nominal costs. So, Mr. Ram, we've taken the liberty to contribute in your name to this hospital so that it can fund the medical expenditure of an underprivileged child. We will send this certificate as well to you at the earliest opportunity. Thank you again.
Wonderful thing to do. I know this hospital, and thank you very much for that.
Thank you again, Mr. Ram. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank the SICCI-360 team. This team is chaired by Mrs. Valli Arun, President of the Vellingro Group and Trustee of the Tamil Isai Sangam. The co-chair of this committee is Professor T. Murugavel, who's head of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at SVC Chennai. Mr. Gokul Santanam, Senior Vice President at Emphasis, is responsible for the online marketing. Mr. Amalan Alavandar, Environment Consultant at the Asian Development Bank, is responsible for the online session moderation. Ms. Vilasni M. Arun, a student of clinical psychology, brings in the student perspective. And of course, our very effective secretarial team led by Mr. Vinod Solomon, Secretary, and Mrs. Bhavani Srinivasan, Assistant Secretary. Without this team, we would not have been able to conduct such wonderful sessions every month since October of 2020, and have since completed our 26th session. We are glad to also announce to you, friends, that the next SICCI-360 session 27, has been scheduled. This is with His Excellency, Mr. T.S. Tirumurthy, also a person very much from Tamil Nadu. He has been the former permanent representative of India to the United Nations. I'm sure most of you would be aware of him, especially in the Ukraine-Russia war conflict period, when he has represented India significantly. This session is scheduled for December 22nd. It's a Thursday, 4:30 p.m. India time, and it's scheduled to be held at SICCI's MAC Hall. We request each one of you to please mark your calendars and join us for this session as well. Thank you very much, friends, for having joined us today. We are very appreciative of your presence with us and certainly look forward to your ongoing participation with us. Thank you. Nandri, Vanakkam.